Catholic Family Podcast presents Lent Around the World, daily traditional Catholic meditations read by our friends from across the globe.
The Passion and Death of Our Lord Jesus Christ by the Most Reverend Alban Goodier. Chapter 7, Part 18. Jesus before Annas. Jesus now gave permission to his captors to do their worst. He had asserted his authority. He had declared how he could defend himself if he would. He had already beforehand rendered good for evil. He had made his appeal to the best that was in them, their memory of their former freedom with him. For the rest, the scriptures must be fulfilled. The will of his Father must be done, and he had no other will of his own but to do it. He had a baptism wherewith he must be baptized, and until it was accomplished, his own work on earth would not be completed, his heart would not be satisfied. He would let men do with him what they would. Every vilest instinct that dwelt in man, the worse than beast of which he was always capable, should be let loose and be allowed to vent itself upon him. Love had been trampled underfoot, truth had been slighted, hatred had been given the reins. The world should see for all time, if it chose to see, to what extreme hatred would always drive. The mob, given its way, gathered like a pack of ravenous wolves around him. In their midst, the police and their tribune, the guardians of law and order, assumed a pompous authority, as if the capture belonged by right to them. A few months before, they had been sent to take him prisoner and had been beaten by his mere word. And they said to him, "Why have you not brought him?" The ministers answered, "Never did man speak like this man." Now, that voice was silenced, that eye no longer made them fear. Instead, Jesus had given them permission to do what they had come to do, and they could proceed. Then the band and the tribune and the servants of the Jews took Jesus and bound him. In these few words, we are told of the first act of violence done to Jesus in the Passion. The moon was full, lighting up the scene with a light that invited to silence and making the shadows beneath the trees darker. The hands of Jesus were bound with cords behind him. A rope was tied about his waist, for from what follows, we know that he was dragged from one place to another. The captors set out down the hill, noisy in the night, boasting to themselves because of their easy victory, brave enough now that it was clear that their prey would offer no resistance. There had been no need, after all, for the swords and clubs and sticks, no need for the warning of Judas that they should be cautious and secure in what way they did. Their victim's magic powers had deserted him, if they had ever really existed. With the kiss of a friend, his strength had failed him, and they need not fear him any more. They crossed again over the brook Kedron, in which some would see a prophecy fulfilled, up the slope once more and by the lower gate into the city, along the same road and down the same street that both he and they had traversed a short time before. Officially, the captors had been sent by Caiaphas and his council. Therefore, officially, they were to hand over their prisoner to them. But on their way, they passed the house of Annas. And Annas, though no longer holding office, yet was and had been for years the power behind the throne, the ruling spirit of Jewry. He had himself been high priest. 5 of his sons were high priests after him, as well as a son-in-law, Caiaphas, and a grandson. He was a Sadducee by profession, and was hard, an unbeliever in spite of his dignity, as were others of his class. One who had evolved a creed of his own, satisfying all his requirements in this world, since he did not believe in another, and not believing in another, then even in this world, he believed in none but himself. Annas was his own god. his own beginning and end. Cool, calculating, determined, successful, wise with the wisdom of the children of men. Indeed, he was the wise man of Jerusalem, the independent man who was never ruffled, the prudent man who would always in the end secure his own way, who could promote men to office and let them govern as they would, yet somehow, through it all, his own will was done. He was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the ruling high priest at that time. Both history and the Gospels indicate that Caiaphas owed his priesthood to Annas. It was common, almost natural, especially if it was known that Annas wished it, to bring important cases before him for a preliminary judgment, and the case of Jesus of Nazareth was surely one of these. For this reason, when they came to the gate of Annas's court, the guard almost instinctively turned in. By this time Judas had gone, for he had done his work, and no one gave him further thought. The soldiers had no one now to guide them. They could scarcely have been surprised to find the old man waiting for them. Of all the elders of Judea, none could have known the significance of Jesus Christ and his teachings better than Annas. Whether he believed it or not, he was well acquainted with the law and the prophets, of the practice of the temple and the meaning of that practice. He was the first exponent in the land. Indeed, he had made good use of his prerogative for the enrichment of himself and his family. He knew well that according to the prophets and according to the firm belief of the people, there would one day come a Messiah. He knew that his coming, if there was any truth in Judaism at all, was destined to inaugurate a new law, a new kingdom, a new ceremonial. In a true sense, it was not so much Jesus Christ of Nazareth that he and his following had need to fear, as the new thing that he might found and leave behind him. What had alarmed Herod the king when Jesus was born made Annas suspicious now. Annas was the true successor of Herod. To him, the mere death of Jesus was a secondary matter. Of what use would that death be if, nevertheless, followers were left to propagate his doctrine? If with Jesus the guards had also brought his disciples, Annas would have been better pleased. Therefore, at his preliminary trial, we may notice a sharp contrast with all that followed. Here were no witnesses brought, no sentence was passed. Jesus was not asked to pronounce his own condemnation. He was questioned only about those things in which Annas himself was interested. Jesus stood before this merciless, masterful, far-seeing, calculating man. That he would be ultimately condemned, Annas had no doubt at all. He could safely leave that to his more eloquent and self-righteous son-in-law, who knew well enough already what was Annas's mind. But his own examination went deeper. He looked through Jesus, as it were, and beyond him, making nothing of him, making much of what might follow after he was dead. Hence the nature of his questions: who Jesus actually was, whether indeed he were or were not what he was said to be. What were the charges to be brought against him? All these things were of no account to Annas. What mattered more was the influence he possessed, the sway over other men that was pitted against his own. Who and how many and of what kind were his followers? What was the secret of his teaching which gave him his power, not only over friends but also over enemies? Annas called for no other evidence. He wanted only the secret of the man himself, and that only Jesus could give him. The high priest, therefore, asked Jesus of his disciples and his doctrine. But Jesus knew what was in man, and he knew Annas. If he could so easily sum up that fox, Herod, if he could so boldly and convincingly accuse the scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, if he could silence the Sadducees by a single question, so that they could harass him no more, he needed not that any man should reveal Annas to him. Moreover, Annas was not one to whom he was bound to reply. He was no official judge. He had no authority to put questions to anyone on his trial. Jesus was in no sense his subject. Before the law, they were equal men. To Caiaphas, when the time came, he would reply as was his duty. To the questionings of Annas, he would give no positive answer. All through the Passion, we shall notice this exact attention to the claim of the law on the part of Jesus. Never for a moment was he anything but the master, even of those who held him their prisoner. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogue and in the temple whither all the Jews resort, and in private I have spoken nothing. Why askest thou me? Ask them who have heard what I have spoken to them. Behold, they know what things I have said. Which of these two was the judge of the other? As Jesus in the garden had held the crowd till such time as he chose to let it have its will, so now he held Annas, and Annas could do no more. As of old, on many an occasion, he had defied Pharisees and Sadducees till they could make no answer, but could only retire to plot against him. So now he silenced Annas. Least of all would he answer him anything which might betray any one of his own. Had Annas lived in Galilee, he would have long since learnt how futile would be any question that might lead to injury of his own disciples. Had Annas lived in Galilee, he would have known how tenderly he had cared for them, how he had defended them when they were accused of gathering corn on the Sabbath, how he had spoken for them when their customs at table had been blamed, how, when one of them had been too bold about paying the tribute, he had worked a miracle to save him from embarrassment. Though men might injure or accuse himself, never a word uttered against them went unrebuked. Annas was silenced and had failed. For once, he had met one who dared to defy and challenge him. He could do no more. He could not condemn, for that was not within his office. Even if he could, he would not, for that might compromise him. But his sycophants in the room read the mind of their master well, and willingly supplied what he was too cautious of himself to do. They saw that he had been worsted, and they would avenge him. Be he right or wrong, that this Lord of theirs should be defied was not to be endured. Honest defense there was none. There remained only that of brutality, that commonest resort of might and cowardice in high places. A guard was standing by. It is the duty of a guard to defend his ward from injury, not only to hold him that he may not escape, but here it was manifest what would please the master of the court. Annas would not demean himself, would not even show a sign of discomfiture, but brutality in another would be easily condoned. The guard raised his soldier's strong arm. With his fist he struck Jesus on the mouth. It was the second of the deliberate injuries of which we are expressly told. And when he had said these things, one of the officers standing by gave Jesus a blow, saying, Answerest thou the high priest so? If we need a proof, beyond his own unhesitating words, that Jesus was the master in the interview with Annas, we have it in the soldier's anger. So much was he the master that his guard could interpret his attitude as arrogance, and in reward he offered him an insult, the greatest insult one man could offer to another in those days, so great that a Greek philosopher had declared it unforgivable, whatever else a man of honor may allow himself to forgive. Yet had Jesus long since said how such a blow should be received. When they were struck upon the face, he had told his own what they should do. And what he had said was very different from anything that had been said before him. You have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, not to resist evil, but if one strike thee on the right cheek, turn to him also the other. And if a man will contend with thee in judgment, and take away thy coat, let go thy cloak also unto him. If, then, Annas would have an answer concerning his doctrine, he should have it by example more than in words. Jesus recovered himself from the staggering blow. Though the mark of it would remain, blue and black across his face to the end, yet was he unmoved. One thing only he would do, as he had done often before when he had been hurt or injured. He would complain. He would defend plain justice. But, as on so many other occasions before, his complaint and his defense would be put as a simple question that could not be answered. He turned from Annas to the guard, meekly, yet no less as one having authority. Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken ill, give testimony of the evil. But if well, why strikest thou me?" It was the same Jesus then in word and in manner as he had always been. "Will you also go away? Were not the 10 made clean, and where are the 9? Which of you shall convince me of sin? If I speak the truth to you, why do you not believe me? Many good works have I done among you. For which of them do you stone me? So long a time have I been with you, and have you not known me? Friend, whereto art thou come? Judas, dost thou betray the Son of Man with a kiss? Have you come out, as it were, against a thief to apprehend me?" A grim silence fell upon the court. The rebuke was just, and there was no answer. But that meant no conversion or remorse. Malice is not convinced or converted. It suffers no repentance. It was only clear now to Annas that he could gain no more from this man who, by his simplicity and truth, was more than equal to all his astuteness. He too, like his colleagues in the temple 3 days before, durst not ask him any more questions. He would dismiss him to those who were less subtle than himself, and therefore would be less cautious. They would at least have authority, which he had not, and he knew well how they would use it. With that easy contempt which falsehood in high places can assume when it is beaten, he dismissed the prisoner and his guard. The business, after all, was not his concern. It did not even interest him. He went into his palace as if nothing had been brought before him. We do not hear of Annas any more till long after Jesus had been dead and buried, and then, once more, we find him busy about his disciples and his doctrine.